Well, we're here because of Corson Hirschfeld and his photography of sacred places around the world. Hirschfeld was drawn to ancient monuments, buildings, petroglyphs, archaeological sites, to use a scientific term, worldwide. So he was interested in the idea and the expression of the sacred in landscape, sacred spaces, powerful places. In his painted photos, he expressed his deeply felt connection to these places. He felt the importance of these places can connect people from very different cultures and different eras through time. So tonight we want to talk about powerful places, landscape, ancestors, artworks, and how art connects people, and then also how art and archaeology can work together in this area. So what I'd like to do is ask our two artists, Lyle and Ramson, to share a little bit of their work. And then we just have some discussion questions, and audience can put questions in the Q&A, and Ella will feed those back to us as time goes on. So let's go ahead and start with Lyle, who's prepared a few slides, and I'm going to share my screen. And when I get those up, Lyle, just tell me when to change the slide.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. It's evening here, almost here, coming from Village of Bacavi on 3rd Mesa, Hopi Reservation. Welcome, and thanks for having me be a part of this panel discussion. So Ella gave a pretty good introduction to who I am. So there's just, reiteration of that. I would like to point out I am a proud graduate of Northern Arizona University, and Kelly was one of my professors back in the day and helped me get an understanding of, who I am and where I come from. And hopefully, we have a reciprocal relationship now as we work together in this field. So just take note of that specific piece of jewelry that's up there, the little T-door shaped one side of an earring set. That's the type of jewelry I make, and I'll refer back to that as we go forward. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Kelly. So my journey in art and archaeology, I was an archaeologist first, way back in the day. 1997 is about when I started in this field. Really, my interest in ancestral art can be tied back to about 2006, when I was working on an excavation project in north central Arizona, just outside of Payson. And during our work, we were uncovering, of course, the usual types of artifacts. But what we were also taking out of there was a lot of pipestone material. Pipestone is a clay shale type of material. It's really, it can be found there in the Verde Valley. There's known mines of pipestone to the west of where we were working at. So it was a heavily traded item back and forth. And we kept finding this material, and I was really drawn to it just because of its color, its feel, its texture. It was something that seemed really organic to me. And out of that, I started doing my own research on the work and what this jewelry we were finding, what it was made out of. And so I was able to find, places to acquire my own pipestone from rock shops and other folks that had access to it. And so I just started going down this path of trying to figure out, how to make jewelry out of it. I kept on that for a number of years. And then much later, I met this gentleman, Dr. Saul Headquist. He's a good friend of the Hopi people here. Unfortunately, Saul passed away a few years ago, but his research that he was working on as part of his dissertation was focusing on, in part, sourcing where some of the turquoise that we find at ancestral sediments, where that was coming from. And so through his work with our Cultural Preservation Office, he and I developed a really close relationship there. And we started to kind of, develop some more research questions. Part of his research that I find really interesting is the work that he did at Homology 1. Homology 1's a grouping of settlements located just outside of Winslow, Arizona. And so through his research of studying isotopes, different types of isotopes that are found in turquoise, he was able to show that a majority of the turquoise was coming from two locations. One was the Cerrillos Hills, which is located over by Santa Fe, and that's a known prehistoric turquoise source. I think the majority of it is still, it's still available to mine, but it's on private land now. The other source was this place called Canyon Creek, and I don't really know much about that location, but he was able to show that's, you know, kind of the trade network that was in place, as well as some other secondary locations where turquoise was coming from, indicated by, you know, those three other locations in southern Arizona and New Mexico. And so, you know, Saul and I, we used to have these conversations about, you know, just turquoise in general, you know, and I like to say that he and I, we crossed paths on the turquoise trail, you know, and it led us into a whole other realm of discussion that, you know, unfortunately we weren't able to fully see the completion, but some of that research still exists out there. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Kelly. So, you know, part of the research that Saul and I were working on was the metaphors behind turquoise, right? What does it mean to modern day, mainly Hopi people, but we were also, Saul was researching along with other Zuni consultants. And so we really wanted to look at the metaphors and try and trace how that, you know, connects us back to these ancestral landscapes. And so one of our research goals that we wanted to embark upon was looking more at the mosaic work. And so we know that there's a pretty good collection of ancestral mosaics that come from different sites throughout the Southwest. And so we wanted to go ahead and look at that type of information and research where these types of turquoise were coming from. He asked me, hey, do you think you could replicate some of the mosaics that we're looking at? So I said, yeah, okay, not ever having made that kind of jewelry before. So he was really, you know, kind of a big influence, a big encouragement for me to, you know, push my boundaries a little bit. So there on the slide, you see on the left-hand side, the ancestral forms from Chaco and Canishpa, which is located down on the White Mountain Apache Reservation. And then on the right side, my own interpretations, you know, that Saul in part, you know, encouraged me to do. So that's the things that, you know, Saul and I were talking about. And again, maybe some of this research will see the light of day, who knows, you know. I still have a lot of that draft material that he and I were sending back and forth to one another. So parts of his research, I should mention, will be on display in an upcoming exhibit that the Arizona State Museum is working on right now. I don't know all the details, but that's supposed to come about hopefully in the fall. So keep your eyes open for that. And it's really looking at jewelry, you know, indigenous jewelry here in the Southwest from ancestral times all the way through kind of, you know, the modern day. So hopefully, you know, we'll get to see more of that in the future. Next slide, Kelly. So if you refer to the first slide again, and why am I obsessed with this keyboard imagery? You know, my connection begins way back again, back in the very first days of when I started doing archaeology. The middle picture is me, of course. That's probably around 1997, 98. And at the time, I was a student worker going to school at NAU, but also employed in part with the National Park Service there in Flagstaff. So we worked at Wapatki National Monument, Walnut Canyon, where I used to see Ramson a lot. He was always there demonstrating in the visitor center, and then Sunset Crater, you know. So very early part of my career. And one of our tasks as workers was the preservation and stabilization of our own ancestral sites. So, you know, we spent years and years working on these ancestral sites, preserving them, stabilizing them. One of my first projects was in this room. It's room 1 of the North Unit at Wapatki Pueblo. And it's a second story room, so it's not accessible to the public. So I would, you know, every day for about 3 weeks, you know, climb up there with my mortar, my tools, and my clipboard and whatever else. And I would be up there for the whole day, you know, working in that room itself. during my breaks, I would sit across from that room and just stare out that door, and watch the tourists walk by, whatever was happening outside that door. Um, Eventually, this image just kind of became imprinted, in my own mind. And so the door that's just above the left of the black and white photo is the actual photo of that door. We were pretty fortunate in our work with the Park Service, because as we progressed from student worker through eventually earning permanent status with the Park Service, we were able to travel all across the Southwest and work in all kinds of national parks and monuments. So we got exposed to a lot of different aspects of our own ancestral architecture that was out there. And I was always looking for this T-shaped doorway. When I first started working in archaeology, I had some idea of what this form meant to Hopi people. I won't necessarily go down that path right now, but we do know what it means and what it references in our ancestral past. And so for me as a Hopi person, it was really just a good verification of our oral histories, that have been passed down about the various clans of ancestral Hopis that have moved across the landscape. And so this is one of those markers, that shows where ancestral Hopis have resided, 1,000 years ago. So beginning in the upper left corner is the upper dwelling at Tonto National Monument. Counterclockwise is the Wapatki doorway. Over is a doorway just outside Canyonlands. The door in the upper right is a door that's literally kind of right in my backyard on Black Mesa. I don't think this door or this site has been documented at all. Just below that is a door from Mesa Verde. And then in the lower right is a doorway from Inscription House, which is a part of Coestima, otherwise known as Navajo National Monument. And then to the left is a door from Aztec. And then, of course, the big Chacoan doorway. Then in the lower left, there's a really cool sealed doorway that's found out in Middle Mesa, which is in the backcountry of Wapatki National Monument. So those folks actually took the time to seal that doorway up, before they moved on. And then above that doorway is another door from along the San Juan River. So for me, this is one of those iconic emblems that I've carried with me throughout my whole career. It really didn't find true expression for me until really probably about the last 5 or 6 years. As I started to do jewelry more and more, I wanted to try and find things that were unique to who I was, my experiences. And so this doorway shape ultimately became something that I start to incorporate into my jewelry work now. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Kelly. So this intersection, right, of art and archaeology, how do I utilize it? And you can see 2 more examples of the T-door jewelry form that I make nowadays. And so, but really, how am I utilizing both my skill set as an archaeologist and this new thing that I'm going down with the jewelry work? Prior to the pandemic and all of us being closed in, I was able to go to various artist markets, cultural demonstration programs, and that gave me the opportunity to really, sit down and talk with the public at large and talk about, our connections as Hopi people to these ancestral sites. Why are they important to protect and preserve? What are those, not only the tangible physical connections we have, but how do our own cultural histories connect us back in time? And so, putting that part of the puzzle together for folks to understand why I'm making the type of jewelry. It also gives me the chance to really talk about my role as an Indigenous person, as a Hopi person who's involved in archaeology. We're fortunate here out at Hopi to have a handful of archaeologists, anthropologists, that have gone through a higher education system and are now, either working for the tribe or out there in the world, helping to promote this Hopi connection to our ancestral landscapes. What I like to talk about is as somebody who's involved in this field, we have to recognize that Hopi and many Indigenous cultures, we have a long kind of conflicted, turmoiled past with anthropology, archaeology, and ethnography. You know, we have histories about those early researchers coming to Hopi and being very intrusive in how they conducted their research. And so part of my goal as being a participant in this field now is to help correct some of those wrongs that were done in the past, to really prioritize our own research goals and what we want to see documented. What is it that we want to achieve, you know, through the projects that we initiate now? So right now there's this idea, and it's been around for a long time, I think, but this idea of indigenous archaeology. What does that really mean? You know, and how are we helping to shape this concept now? Part of it is that changing the perception of archaeology as it's been done in the past, and now reinforcing our own indigenous priorities and perspectives, and really placing that, you know, at the forefront. Part of that is also ensuring that the research that we do has tangible, real life benefits to our own community. So it's not just building a career for somebody outside, you know, that we're able to preserve our own cultural knowledge and bring it back to our communities so that it can be shared, you know, with this generation and the generations, you know, that are coming into the future. So to me, that's, you know, my concept of what I think indigenous archaeology is right now. And I think it varies, you know, from tribe to tribe, from nation to nation. We all have our own cultural ideologies of how we've come to be. And so it's really good to see, you know, that there is a growing number of indigenous archaeologists out there now. When I started back in 1997, you know, we really felt isolated in terms of the type of work we were doing. And there was still maybe some stigma attached to us being involved in this field. But, you know, as the years have progressed and we've been able to show positive results from our collaborative efforts with outside researchers, you know, non-indigenous archaeologists, we're able to show that there are positive benefits for both sides, you know, both the scientific and the cultural. And so that's what the intersection of this whole art and archaeology means to me. Next slide, last one. So I'll just close with this. These are examples of my more recent work that I do now, and you know, kind of indication of the direction that I'm headed with this. And I really like this quote, you know, by Charles Lolema, you know, particularly that last line about how new forms can come out of indigenous backgrounds. If you can look at my work, you know, you can tell who I'm heavily influenced by. You know, I had the good fortune a few years back to help participate in a documentation project of a fine art collection that is owned by the Hopi tribe and archived at the Museum of Northern Arizona. And that fine art collection includes works of art from about 1960 forward, and it encompasses master artists from all different types of art forms, you know, ceramics, textiles, jewelry, carvers, you name it, they're represented in the collection. And part of that collection includes one of the most extensive collections of Charles Lolema work, including probably the greatest examples of his very early work, you know, when he was kind of just starting out, including his ceramic work. You know, a lot of people don't know that he was involved in ceramics early on before he became, you know, well known for his jewelry work. But he's a big influence in my work and how his pushing the envelope, so to speak, with his work is influencing the things that I'm doing now. I don't think I'm of his caliber. I still have a hard time identifying myself as a quote unquote artist. But, you know, it is an inspiration for me to look at the humble beginnings of a lot of artists and see how they've, you know, kind of remained focused in their own endeavors and push themselves to continue, you know, to refine whatever their craft is and not be afraid to take on different challenges, you know. So like the mosaic there that's in the middle, you know, for me, that was another big step for me, you know, push and challenge myself in the type of work that I do. So I want to leave a lot of time for discussion. So that's the last slide for me. If you need to get in a contact with me, there's my contact info. I'm not a very prolific writer, maybe 1 or 2 articles or whatever writings per month. I'm trying to get better at that. I do post available jewelry there, but again, it's usually in small batches. Jewelry isn't my full-time gig. I'm off doing other things most of the time. So, I try and get jewelry done when I can. You can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram page is more of a combination of my archaeology work, my day-to-day, and some jewelry stuff. And email, if that's your chosen route as well. So I'll go ahead and leave it there. And thanks for letting me talk real quick about all this stuff. But I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
Thank you so much, Lyle. I'm just so excited to see how far you're coming with your artwork as well as your scholarship and your writing. And he's being very modest in a Hopi way. He's a very, very good writer. And do check out his blog. Okay, I'm gonna try sharing Ramson's slides. Unless Ella has a question coming in right now. Are we good?
We can hold the questions until the end.
Okay. Okay, so is this showing up? How's that look?
Looks good.
And then you should just be able to hit space bar.
Okay.
It's supposed to work like that.
All right. Okay, good evening. My name is Ramson Lamatuwaima. I'm from the village of Hoatvela on Third Mesa, just right across the way from Bacavi. So Lyle and I have probably passed each other on Highway 264 going back and forth. I've been an educator for the better part of my career. Actually, my career spans every grade from kindergarten all the way up through the college level. So it's been one big adventure for me. And I didn't really get into glass blowing maybe until 2 decades ago, when I discovered it quite by accident. But the intriguing thing about this art form for me is that all the parallels that I've been able to draw from Hopi history, our cultural values and beliefs, mythology, just a lot of different things. And also just the fact that, I've been teaching sociology for a number of years. It's really driven me to pose questions about the idea of humanity, history, politics, human behavior in general, and how each of us makes a connection to some kind of art form in our own personal lives. So I'm starting out with this picture of a very old glass melt furnace that I used, I'd say about 15, 20 years ago. And on the left side, you see me gathering glass at the end of a blowpipe. And the parallels that I draw is that of a goise, which is an underground pit oven where we have corn roasting events going on. But the parallel that I drew from this is transformation. You put raw sweet corn into the fire pit after the fire has died down, and you just have coals down there. And on the left, we put clear glass nuggets into a ceramic pot and let that melt down. And in the end, you've got molten glass that you're bringing out of that heat source, and you've got roasted corn coming out of the pit the following morning. And both of these, to me, speak about the emergence of the Hopi people into this fourth world. And also just the idea of change and metamorphosis, from one form into another. Okay, a lot of my work revolves around Hopi ideas of landscape and just culture. And some of the things that I do is I try to explore as much of the landscape as I can, not only on the reservation, but as far as I can go on a tank of gas in a day. And so the result was this piece on the left. which emulates the movement of the rocks in the landscape in an area north of Third Mesa that is called Talastima, or Blue Canyon. And so I'm trying to create the same movement, the same shapes as a landscape, using the same earth tones, and the movement that you see in the background is projected onto the movement that you see in the bowl. The orb on the inside, of course, is speaking to the spherical landscape of the rocks in the foreground. And this is how I choose to connect with the Hopi world, you might say. And, you know, I do get to travel off the reservation quite often. And if I go to some place like Bryce Canyon National Park, or the Wave up in southern Arizona, a lot of that landscape is just very, very powerful. And it also takes me back to the idea that these areas are really unknown, or they're not unknown to Hopi because of the whole migration history of Hopi people. So, you know, the land speaks to me a lot. I've been working on a series called the Swirling Stone series, and I don't have a picture of that to show you, but it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing, is creating rocks or the semblance of stones in my work. I rely a lot on history, on the migration history and the history of Hisatsinam. So back in 2005, I was granted a fellowship by the School of American Research to experiment and explore glass art and bring a lot of the culture in it. And it was in 2005 that I came across these images that are in a place called Barrier Canyon up in Canyonlands National Park. And these really intrigued me. So I took photographs of them. I took them back home and showed them around to some older people who were more well-versed in the culture and our history. And I just kind of picked their brains about it. And I came out with some really interesting views, and just how people still connect to the places that they haven't been to in such a long time. So I took this as an opportunity to recreate that history by creating what I call spirit figures, because that's what archaeologists refer to these paintings as. So from the rock art, I did a translation into glass. And the thing about the two is that the rock art is primarily monochromatic. I mean, they didn't really have a broad spectrum of colors to work with or at their disposal. And here today, I have a good range of different colors that I can incorporate into the work that I do. So all the colors, seeing as they're important to the Hopi, have their own symbolisms. We look at the 4 cardinal directions, and each cardinal direction has an assigned color to it. And the colors themselves communicate some kind of a value or a belief or an image within the culture. So when I do my artwork, I don't randomly select colors, but I go into it using a particular color to communicate a particular idea or to tell a story. And these spirit figures are hand sculpted at about 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. And they continue to be my signature item because seeing as I'm just about the only glass artist from the Hopi tribe, I've never had anybody duplicate anything like this in terms of glass art. So to my knowledge, I'm the only glass blower who does these particular sculptures. Prior to blowing glass, I was a stained glass artist, and I relied a lot, again, on imagery from our own culture. So on this upper panel, you see the San Francisco peaks at the upper left hand, with the clouds up above. And then there's that orange space in the middle, which depicts heat and warmth from the sun. And then on the right side, again, you have a gathering of clouds with rain coming down over the mesas. And the little blue area at the bottom of the orange that divides the two is the Little Colorado River. And the panels on the left and the right below those are symbols of rainbows, of corn plants, eagle feathers, prayer offerings, but they're all abstract. There's no attempt at creating a realistic scene here. And in the center, you see 4 ears of corn inside a piece of pottery. And again, the corn that you see there are symbolic of different cardinal directions. So what I've been taught through my uncles and just growing up in Haute-Villa and belonging to the Puwamaya Society, I learned over the years the importance of these particular colors of corn. The yellow corn being the north sends a message to us to approach life with a positive attitude. The blue corn symbolizes any kind of moisture, whether it's rain or rivers or the ocean. It doesn't matter as long as it's connected to moisture. And then the red corn is then depicting heat and warmth from the sun. And white, which represents the east, can symbolize purity or snow. So when you take all of these colors together and the ideas that come from that collectively, what you have is the potential to create new life with those things. And so on the other side, I don't know if you have a pointer. Can you see this pointer?
It should show up.
Okay, so these are abstract corn plants right here on either side, which comes as a result of the seed corn that you see depicted in the ears of corn here. And then the black and the white on either side are representing day and night or pairs of complementary opposites. And then this figure here is depicting the rainbow and eagle feathers that are used extensively in our ceremonies. So this is how I brought all of these ideas together. This piece is now in a residence in Canoga Park, California. It's been there about maybe at least 25 years, and apparently it's still holding up. This is a blown piece on the left. I call them corn maidens, which is modeled from the young girls who are capable of bearing children, but they're not married yet. And so to show that they're at that point in their lives for certain ceremonies and things, they do wear their hair in what we call poli'ini, which roughly translates to a butterfly whirl. So you can see the hair whirls here on the side. The body itself is reminiscent of an ear of corn. And the symbolism that you see here are from pottery designs. And the rain coming down, clouds and such on this side. I wish I could show you the backside, but I can't here do it with this one. But these are tadpoles, and you really can't see the entire thing, but this is a fish that came from the Mimbres pottery. For about 3 or 4 years, there were a group of us, mostly Hopi, who collaborated with the New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, New Mexico, to do an entire exhibit and a series of workshops on Mimbres pottery. And at the culmination of our group gatherings, each artist was asked to create something that was speaking to the whole project idea. And so this is what I did. It's a membranous image, and there's the connection of the history, just the idea of that culture that probably changed into something else. For a while, people were saying that these people disappeared. Well, that people just don't up and disappear. They become someone else. So this was speaking to that. It's about 18 inches tall. It's hollow, it's blown, and it's sandblasted so that the bluish color is on the top surface and the white color is the color of the piece underneath. So the white areas were all sandblasted away. This is still in the exhibit down in Las Cruces, and I really don't know what's going to happen to this at the end, but I'm sure that something good is going to happen from our efforts. And that's it. That's what I have. So I'm always open to discussion. I welcome your questions. It's okay if you want to disagree with me on some points. That's what debate is all about, and it's always good. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much, Ramson. All right. So one of my favorite things, what I was thinking about when I was listening to both of you, was just how much I enjoy being an archaeologist. And it just gets better every time I get to work with an artist, especially you guys and the whole group that worked on the membrace collections. And I got to go to Oaxaca in Mexico with some Pueblo weavers, and this interchange of getting museum collections out from the storage room and out into the open, into the community, getting community members into the museum, and having these dialogues that aren't only verbal, but sort of whole body experience.
Yeah.
Just getting the past and the present and the future artwork that's going to come out of it. And when Lyle was talking about Indigenous archaeology, I was thinking about the little museum part of it, but then I was also thinking about Sam's work and wondering if I can invite Sam to say a few words about Indigenous archaeology and collaboration in New Mexico where you work.
Well, sure. Thanks, Kelly. And thanks, Ramson and Lyle. I can really kind of reflect a lot of what I want to say, and we definitely don't have time off of what you've already talked about. I think that I'm still fairly early career, but I'm definitely in the tumultuous time of Southwestern archaeology and American archaeology, in which we're starting to understand and acknowledge that we need to really decenter traditional archaeological ways of thinking about things and start looking toward, descendant communities and everything who have a very important, voice to listen to. And so it's been fascinating. A lot of my work has been taking what I thought was really good traditional archaeology and trying to be like, oh no, I'm not, I don't know, I never would call myself doing Indigenous archaeology, but I love Indigenous archaeology, right? And so how can I try to use the work that I've done in a way that benefits the communities in which I work with? And so there's been a lot of thinking, and my sort of thinking is trying to dissolve the barriers between prehistory and history, and looking at long continuous histories of people in the past to people living today, looking toward the future, those sorts of things. One thing that I've been really fascinated about, I guess, is landscape and sacred places. And this is something we might have time to talk about, and maybe we won't. Maybe this is something that we can talk about in a future time period. But I have time, this space when we get together. But one of the things is that archaeologists are very excited about sacred places and understanding landscapes, but there's also an attention, and I think, Lyle, you brought that up when you sort of mentioned I could talk about those doorways, but that goes down a whole nother rabbit hole of understanding the Hopi context to that and everything. And the fact is that sometimes archaeologists don't need to know that deeper meaning in order to understand a place is important and needs to be protected and needs to be accessible for communities. And so one of the things that some of my colleagues and I are trying to understand or trying to figure out is how, as archaeologists, can we identify and talk about these places that don't intrude on their meaning? How can we as outsiders be helpful? And I think this is like an ongoing conversation. We don't need to know all the answers. We don't need to know the deeper meaning. We don't need to know the doings that go behind these sacred places, right? So this is sort of an interesting thing. Another thing that I'm kind of like playing around with, because I'm not an artist, but I really respect this. And this is something maybe I wasn't going to mention this, but now I'm really thinking about it in terms of art and archaeology. Is one of the things that I think archaeologists in the Southwest are really trying to grapple with now is, Lyle, you mentioned it, the really poor history of anthropologists impinging on Pueblo people's rights and property and everything else. And so some of the ethnography that was done was very, very intrusive. And not only was it intrusive at the time, the fact is that it continues to be in libraries and people's shelves and reference. That continues to be offensive. And unfortunately, archaeologists use that ethnography to understand the past. And so we're kind of like propagating that. And so that's something I've been talking about with my, in the Rio Grande, but I think that we could also have this conversation everywhere, and not just with the Pueblos, right? In Native America in general, is what is the role of ethnography and how do we move forward, but also acknowledge the past of anthropology. But I think the thing that I really think is fascinating is that sometimes I don't know if we need ethnography when we have artists, because the thing is that, I mean, I can specifically think of multiple Pueblo artists and poets that talk about all those important Pueblo philosophical, whatever else you want, ideals that archaeologists can use to understand the past. And it's right there. And I just think like things like this ideas of continuity and change, like Ramson, your work of like creating something new based on very ancient traditions, right? That's sort of, I think, in a really kind of pop culture way, you look at Jason Garcia's work at Santa Clara Pueblo, where he's doing a lot of like pop art, right? Those kind of things. There's all like the kind of really like reimagining the past traditions in very contemporary ways, which I think is something that a lot of people, archaeologists included, need to understand is, right? It's like we're all in the modern world, right? No one's artifacts here, and so that's a really important thing. So I just wondered, like, if you see art as really has the ability to really inform archaeologists going forward, and how maybe, we should stop looking at the scholarly literature as much, even though it's there as well. And artists are certainly writing in scholarly literature, but going for more humanistic focus to understand Pueblo culture. And I think that's really, really interesting. So that's sort of where my interests are.
You want to take that up, Lyle? A response?
Yeah, that's a really cool insight. I'm trying to, put that little statement in my mind and carry it. That why do we need ethnographers now when we have artists, Indigenous artists, expressing in real life, in real time, these ancestral connections that ethnographers strive through, an outsider lens to portray, when we can do it as artists, through our own expressions. And I never really thought of it that way, and so I appreciate that. And it's something I'll want to write a whole story about that or something, But
You should.
I just think it's cool, to really, look at, how this artistic expression, conveys all the things like Ramson was portraying. I think, some of you, a lot of us may be familiar with Michael Cabot, that art. He's another Hopi artist who, like to call himself the mythic archaeologist, and that's another great term about how, he was an archaeologist in one sense, but he was really, in Hopi culture and being able to convey those meanings, both in a really intellectual way and as an academic, maybe through the lens of archaeology, but also that artistic expression, kind of wiped away all of that time between ancestral times and who we are today in this world. And so things like that, I really feel that all artists, the different types of artists that are out there still carrying on these traditions, knot by knot, weave by weave, stone by stone, whatever it is, coil by coil, they're continually to, retell those ancestral histories and convey it. Sometimes, like in the pop art, we're reconveying, reimagining, our own ancestral history to convey it in a different way. And I just think that's a really cool way to look at it. And turn it over to Ramson, see what he thinks.
Go for it.
Okay, well, I've been very, very fortunate to have known on a pretty deep level both Michael Cabot and Charles Lolema. I started participating in the Bean Society ceremonies probably in my mid-teens, and I knew Charles for a lot of years. He was an excellent artist and quite the philosopher. And I really did learn a lot from him in terms of looking at myself, not necessarily as an artist, but as a person who was reaching out to the history and trying to kind of gather some ideas of what the future would be like. So he really helped me to understand the ceremonial knowledge in a way that I could apply it to everyday life. And the same thing with Michael. I've known Michael since the 80s. And we actually shared a studio together with another artist, Joe Muktaima, here in Flagstaff for several years. And we just fed off each other's energies. And I really enjoyed talking with Mike because he was big into Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung. And a lot of that just rubbed off on me. So we talk a lot about archetypal images and the hero's journey. And I'll just throw in there too is Mike is the one who introduced me to the 12-step program. I really thank Mike for sobriety on a variety of levels, And both of them had something in common in that they really didn't see themselves as a cog in a machine. They saw themselves more of the energy to make the cogs go around and around. So they were more energy oriented than anything else. We energize our own lives by our own thoughts and our own deeds. We energize the art world by looking at our dreams, looking at archetypal images, looking at what ceremonies are all about, and bringing it to fruition in the form of art. And I really enjoyed looking at the earrings that Lyle is doing because I'm doing something similar to that, but in glass. And it was just really good to see that you can use a wide variety of mediums to communicate the same cultural ideas. So I really like your work. So, we have our own ways of communicating these ideas. And of course, personally for me, this is how I stay connected to history, to our history as a people. as a community, you know, how the Eagle clan came to be where they're at. You know, we have a very, very rich history, but I also am aware that the Eagle clan has a dark history. And a lot of that is connected to Mesoamerican culture, specifically Mayan and Aztecs. And we all know through archaeological evidence that, you know, they weren't peaceful 100% of the time, you know. They were literally out for blood. And that's the connection that I have with my own clan history. So it really helped me to understand who I am and where I choose to be today. And right now, I don't worry about the future. You know, I'll just let that, you know, come as it may. Just focus on doing what I'm doing right now. You know, they say one day at a time, and that's pretty much what it is for me. But yeah, I mean, Joseph Campbell looked at artists as the new myth makers. And in order to keep a culture viable, in order to keep it alive, we need to create myths that will address contemporary issues and contemporary perspectives of the world without letting go of our history as a culture and as a people.
Oui. And amen.
Amen.
Want to get a response to that in, Lyle, or should we go to audience question? Audience question. Ella, what have you got for us?
All right, we've got several questions from the audience, and I'd like to start with one that we've gotten from an attendee who wants to ask the two archaeologists, the two non-native archaeologists on the panel. We've been encouraging our non-native archaeologists to seriously consider how to answer the question, quote, why are you telling the story of Native American history and culture instead of a descendant of these communities? How would Sam and Kelly answer this question?
Ooh, I used to just think, well, this is my function in the world, and there aren't that many Native archaeologists. And when I started in the 80s, that was true. And then Lyle and others came along, and there always have been a few. And so I just thought, well, it's my job to amplify the Native voices that there are, and to be a kind of translator in a way. In between, anthropologists have always described themselves as culture brokers, kind of sitting in between and being a translator. And just the older I've gotten, the more experience I've gotten, the more opportunities I've had to work with not just Indigenous archaeologists of Indigenous descent, but the artists and community members, the more I just try to stand back and facilitate, you know, what do you guys want to do? What collections do you want to see? What sites do you want to visit? What maps do you need made for your own purposes? So my first real archaeology job was for the Navajo Nation Archaeology Department as a ceramics specialist. And so my job was to analyze the pottery that was coming from archaeological excavations that were done in the process of paving roads on the Navajo Reservation. And so I could answer the question, what trade relationships did people who lived here have, and how old is this site? And some of the information I've produced has been helpful with land and water rights claims and with law enforcement cases of trying to get sacred and ceremonial objects back, or trying to get looted artifacts back home to where they go. So I guess that's my answer. And I try to be humble about it more and more. Sam.
Well, that's a really good question. It's a really blunt question, and it really cuts to like a lot of our insecurities as like, you know, a white male, youngish outsider, you know, who's looking at, you know, Pueblo religion. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And I don't know. I think a lot of this is like always tried to be respectful, but you know, a lot of my dissertation work was stopped at Spanish contact. And only the last few years I realized how ridiculous that was. It was a way, it's by doing that, archaeologists kind of divorce the present and the past, and take away, current Pueblo people's history, at least in the narrative that archaeologists are talking about it. And so this has been like, that question really gets at like my early-ish midlife crisis, where what is the point of archaeology? And not as like, not as like, what is the point of my career? But like, what is the point of archaeology? And I think that's a really good question. And I think that's sometimes a little harder to answer than I'd like it to be. And personally, what I think now is that, I think I've tried to be respectful, but follow the law, try to follow beyond the law and everything. But I think I'm trying to put some projects together. COVID's been hard for everyone, especially working with Pueblo communities where everybody's really, really cautious about COVID, especially in the Southwest. It's been, but I think we're going to start climbing out of that. And, as I start to collaborate, work more, I think the number one question that I've been told by my Native colleagues and other really concerned, anthropologists who care about my future in archaeology is like start and say, how can I help? What can this work do for the community? And I always think it's interesting, like Hopi has been the leaders on saying, you want to do research at Hopi, here's what you need to do. Like Hopi lines it out on their website, and it's awesome. It's like, and I think the number one question, Lyle, is like, how can this help us? Like, what is this doing for the Hopi people? Yeah, and it's awesome, right? And so I think that's probably the way to go about this in general. Although I still have questions on like, what is my point? And I think I can fall back on a lot of what Kelly was saying, that there aren't as many Native archaeologists as we would like. And, that's like, that is something that we can assist with for programs. And I've also been on water cases for Pueblos and et cetera, and trying to help with land and water issues. But I think the thing is that archaeology does present a really useful toolkit. And this toolkit can be used in many different ways. It can be used for bad ways, and it can be used for really beneficial ways. And so my career going forward is trying to be of maximum usefulness to the people in which I work. And I think that way, it not only does it answer the question of what am I doing as an archaeologist, but it also puts a much more gratifying meaningfulness behind the work that I could potentially do and the work that we do as archaeologists, because we're actually doing good in the world, or trying to at least, or at least not doing bad. That's the hope.
No harm. We hope.
No harm.
There is. But, yeah.
Well, thank you both for your answers to that one. And I agree, it is a blunt question, but a necessary one. Another question that we have is, what can ordinary people do to help protect places that are sacred to Native Americans?
Right.
Lyle?
Yeah, Lyle. In site management before.
I'm going to defer to my.
The Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, development projects. There's so many good, well-intentioned land management agencies, and then there's so much development happening, especially here in Arizona, just with really rapid growth. What do we do?
Yeah, well, give our land back. We'll take care of it.
Land
maybe that's the start.
But yeah, search hashtag land.
It's a big goal there.
So I do think writing letters.
Yeah, just yeah. In general, I think pay attention to what Indigenous people are talking about, and what we're saying in regards to our own ancestral places. There's a wide variety of organizations out there, that are nonprofit conservation groups that are, what I would call allies of Indigenous culture. And you can research them, like Friends of Cedar Mesa, Grand Canyon Trust, Conservation Lands Foundation, Archaeology Southwest. there's a lot of those types of foundations out there that can that are assisting in endeavors that are being put forth by tribes. And so I think they serve as a good lead in terms of they're not taking the lead, but they're listening to what we have to say and what we would like to see happen with these sites, and then utilizing whatever resources they have. Every tribe, every federally recognized tribe has that formal government to government relationship, and that's one mechanism. And sometimes that's a slow process, and of course we have changeover. But on the other hand, there's other ways that you can help these outside organizations increase our presence, our indigenous presence, our indigenous voice, in these types of conservation efforts that are out there. And just on a practical level, yeah, if you're out there on the landscape, have respect for it. The things that are out there as quote unquote artifacts, they don't belong to us. They belong to those that came before. Let's respect that history, but also recognize as well that they still have this connection to modern descendant indigenous communities. And so they're not just they don't exist in static time. They're not relegated to the prehistoric. Those connections traverse boundaries, traverse time. And so we need to be mindful of those kinds of things out there. So there's a whole lot of things out there that the everyday person can do, but do some research, ask those questions about how you can help. And it's more of a directed effort. I think we need specific questions like that, then we can provide some potentially specific answers, or at least push you in the right direction.
Thank you, Lyle. Would anyone else like to jump in on that one?
I think he said it best. Amplify, listen, amplify what Indigenous people are saying, get involved with the nonprofits Lyle mentioned. Write letters to your Congress people and senators and land managers, and shout out to Deb Haaland, our new Secretary of the Interior, who's a member of Laguna Pueblo. And there's a lot of excitement in Indian country about her leadership and her very respectful orientation to the land and sacred places, a balance of management priorities on our public lands.
All right, well, we've got another question for the artists on the panel. How has the pandemic influenced your motivation as an artist?
Wow.
He's happy to be vaccinated, I'll say that.
Yeah.
We both are. Those are really
well, there's a positive side and a not so positive side for me. The not so positive side is that because we were on edge for so long, that your interaction with the creative process was really diminished. And there are days where I felt pretty despondent because of the quarantining. There were times when I just feel sorry for myself because I felt that my artistic juices were being choked. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't visit friends or family and maintain a connection in that sense. The upside of it for me personally was that it gave me a chance for reflection as to how we got into this situation and how humanity is going to deal with this. Just kind of throwing this in the previous question about what can people do to help along with the continuation of archaeological sites and archaeology is to educate yourself. And I started reading a lot about the virus itself and got a lot of good information from that. I knew what precautions I should be taking. I knew that I could still take a walk to the edge of the mesa and feel relatively secure in that. It gave me a chance to journal and to do thumbnail sketches of some ideas. And I ordered a book on the pandemic called Apollo's Arrow. And that was helpful for me to see how the global community, how they could see themselves getting through this, because my elders would tell me that this thing is not going away right away. We're looking at like a 12-round boxing match. We're still in for surges. And these are coming from older people who don't have a good base of science under their belts. What they rely on is the history and the prophecies that do occur in Hopi culture. So I did a little bit of investigating on my own, doing reading and research, and found that what they were saying, what they were sharing with younger people was pretty much holding true, especially when I started getting into this book. The other interesting book that I read recently is a combination of how pandemics affect cultures, specifically cultures of way back when. It was called The Lost Cities of the Monkey Gods. And I thought that was a really interesting read because it talks about cultures of the past and in history, what became of these people, what happened to them, and through explorations and investigations, the conclusion was that they had succumbed to European introduced diseases. And the course that that event followed is pretty much a precursor to what we're going through today. And once I educated myself, I felt okay with it. And I've been vaccinated twice now. Thank goodness I've been quarantined enough to have always tested negative for the virus. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to get rid of my mask. I'll sit next to this lady because I've known her for like 30 years or so.
You can tell if I'm lying about having been anywhere.
Yeah.
My university tests
but-
the hell out of me.
but-
Negative, I'm vaccinated. You have to go through this.
But there's something that is not researchable. It's just a feeling, and this innate gut feeling that you have that you're okay. Once all of that came full circle, I was back on track. So today, I'm really motivated to work. I understand that we're not out of the woods yet. They tell us that when you don't see light at the end of the tunnel, all it means is you're in a curve. So I'm just feeling my way through the darkness of that curve until I can see some light. And while I'm doing that, I might as well do artwork. So that's what I've been doing.
I guess pretty similar to what Ramston said. There's the creative energy ebbs and flows. The past year, some days you're on it, other days you don't want to walk into the room and sit down at the workbench. But I am looking forward, to getting back out there again. Like I said, the good part of this jewelry work was the interaction with everybody out there, other artists, the public, and having been away from that now, the whole year of last year really forces you, makes you appreciate, those little things that we all took for granted about being around friends and families and just, out there in the world, sharing, whatever you have, your knowledge, your gifts. And so that's what I'm looking forward to coming up. I know, again, yeah, we're still doing a lot of virtual things, of course, and I'm okay with that. Pretty introverted by nature, so being stuck in the studio day in, day out doesn't bother me so much, but again, I am looking forward to getting out there and interacting with folks. And so there's hope out there.
I do hope we keep doing online events like this, because we're reaching people in Oklahoma and all over the country that we wouldn't otherwise get to talk with.
Me too, Kelly, and I really appreciate online events and hearing everyone's perspective on this. I've got a question now specifically for Lyle that several people have asked, actually. Can you feel or see or tell the difference between different turquoise sources, and do you have a specific type of turquoise you prefer using?
Yes and no. I think it's I try and get there's turquoise here in the Southwest, China, Persia, some coming in from Mexico. So there's different areas that you can get it. I'm not that much of an expert, and some folks are, through my own, what last year gave to me was, again, like Ramson, being able to research more and dive deep into, the history of turquoise and what's been going on with this, stone, throughout the ages. And you really have to give credit to some of those early mining, operations in which they were more or less family owned. Some of them still are, but they really had a good idea of what types of turquoise they were getting, the quality of it. And they were basing that off of, its stability, the matrix it has, every turquoise that comes from different regions has its own appearance and look. And so it's mainly based off the visual that I can judge, somewhat what I think this source of turquoise is coming from. There's new mines and new types of stones, being found right now. And even though they're limited in quantity, they do have their variations. And so somewhat, I can tell in terms of what type of turquoise it is. And then, of course, yeah, just the quality of it, it varies. Turquoise by nature is a soft stone, it's on the lower end of the hardness scale. There are some, what they would call gem quality, which is really hard. It's more silica than anything else. And so there's that kind of material that, I sometimes work with. It just depends, on where I'm getting it from. I'm not so much of a stickler about, where I'm getting it from in terms of what actual source. It is nice to be able to convey that to, people that I interact with and folks that buy my jewelry about what type of turquoise I'm utilizing at any given point. For the most part, I'm just satisfied as long as it's quality turquoise that holds itself together under the trim saw and other operations that I use. So, but it varies, it varies, and that's the nature of it. You may have, many times I've had the most really kind of cool, beautiful piece of turquoise in its rough form, in a nugget form, and I can't wait to work with it. But as soon as I, put it under the trim saw or something else, and it starts to crumble apart, that's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. That's the way the turquoise goes, and so you just kind of have to roll with it and move on to the next piece. And so maybe ask me that question in 10 more years, as I get exposed to more and more of this, I'll be able to really ID what I'm working with. But for now, again, I'm learning as I go, and that's the fun part of it.
Thank you, Lyle. We have a question for Ramson as well. How long did it take for you to create the Corn Maiden?
Almost 21 years. I get asked that a lot of festivals and demonstrations, how long does it take you to do this? Well, the actual process of making a corn maiden may take about 16 hours total. But when I say over 21 years, I'm talking about the experience that I've had to build up in order to get to that point. And this is some of the things that I try to share with the general public, in that, you know, we're so locked into this time thing. It's almost like, you know, how quickly can you get this done? It kind of leans towards instant gratification. And when you think about the entire creative process, it begins with a concept, and, you know, it just rolls around in your head for, you know, a day, months, years, until it's ready to take on a form. So the actual process of fabricating a piece may take, you know, 15, 20 minutes, or to 2 weeks for a corn maiden. But the idea that what you're putting into it of yourself can take a long period of time. It's like when I work on a piece, what I was taught is that all art heals. And so you don't go into it with the intent of producing a final product for the final product's sake. You're doing it in the hopes that ultimately someone's pain will be lessened by an art piece, and they'll find a connection with it. And when they do that, when you can alleviate some of their pain, and you know, I understand that everybody carries a certain amount of pain with them. But as an artist, with the work that I produce, if I can alleviate someone's pain, even a notch, you know, I've done my work in it as an artist. So all of these ideas come into play with that. The other thing is that with my artwork, I try to tell a story. Because again, there are a lot of us who have some kind of void in their life, and we're trying to fill that void with something that's meaningful and personal for us. I was once told by a very, very good artist friend of mine, a glassblower, who is more experienced than I am. You know, this is about 15, 20 years ago when I first got started in it. He said, "Ramson, you're not a very good glassblower." He said, "But," he said, "you have the story." And he went on to say, you know, you can be the best glass blower in the world, but if there's no story with it, then it's just another piece of glass. So that's the important thing. You're trying to communicate a part of who you are, not only as an artist, but as a person who has certain beliefs, certain perspectives of the world. And this is what you're trying to connect with in terms of whomever. So for me, those things are important. You know, yeah, I can make a blown apple in 15 minutes. But if I do it just for the sake of blowing an apple, the intrinsic value of it is almost zero. It might look nice on your kitchen counter, but if there's no story to it, then it's just another piece of glass.
Wow, that's very profound, and thank you for your response, because I really didn't think about that with the question, the amount of time, but I expect you do get asked that a lot, and it's just fascinating. So thank you. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists again as we wind down on time for joining us tonight. And so I have one final question. How can attendees of this event support Indigenous artists? And specifically, how can they find out more about your artwork or purchase from you?
Well, we're trying to be humble here, but I'll go first. I do post my work, and what I tell people is I share my life with others through social media. I not only post my work on Facebook and Instagram, but I also just give people an idea of what I'm doing on a daily basis. Some thoughts, some perspectives I share, some of them philosophical, some of them practical. I do have a website that is in dire need of improvement. If anybody is interested, they can email me directly. If you are on Facebook, you can look at my past posts and get an idea of what I've been doing in terms of artwork and just life in general. My email address is available to anyone who wishes to take it on.
Let's try putting it in the chat while Lyle answers.
Yeah, pretty much same answer response as Ramson. Shop local. I think there's I see. I'm only on Instagram. I do have a Facebook page. It's not active. I should reactivate it and gear it more towards what I'm doing now. But I see just a huge growth of independent artists there on Instagram, and that's one of the reasons why I'm there, is because there's the creative on that social platform is really good to see the individual artists there doing their own thing, and so support them. We're all out there doing our own little bits and pieces here and there. I know you can go to a gallery, but like Ramson said, you may not get that story behind it, so buying directly from the artists themselves enables you to get that history and learn the number of years that it takes, to get to a point where you feel good about selling your artwork out there in the world. And so developing that relationship, that interaction with artists, I think goes a long way. And you can, say that you've known this artist from this time period moving forward. So yeah, I think my contact information was up there. If you didn't see it, Kelly can put it up. But yeah, social media, email, website, those are the ways you can contact me. So thank you.
I think I'd like to add one more bit of information for everyone out there. The Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe is putting together a year-long exhibit that's entitled Clearly Indigenous. It's going to revolve the work of about a dozen native glass artists. And it's going to open this coming May. However, the reception and all the food and stuff is not going to happen until maybe August, just prior to the Santa Fe Indian Market. They just released a book called Clearly Indigenous, and it's a recap of all of the native glass artists who have work in this exhibit. It's a beautiful book. I just encourage people to look at that.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I think I can speak for all of our attendees, enjoyed hearing from you and learning from your perspectives. Thank you to everyone who attended as well. You'll be receiving an email in a few days with a short survey that we'd love if you would fill it out about your experience so that we can continue to put on more events like this. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great night.